So thanks for that. I'm thinking back to what you said about the unconscious, which is the second part. So would you then say this is usually from also the family? So how the family has been with money, and then the person unconsciously takes that on board as well? Or
Yes.
it is not familiar? How? Because it's so unconscious, how do you then develop this? So this is quite interesting.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. A lot of these beliefs they nearly permeate our skin, right? Our parents don't have to teach us this stuff. We learn by observing. So in many ways, you have these even intergenerational patterns around money that have been given from one person to the next. And for example, if you deal with marginalized communities where they've experienced a lot of, let's call it structural injustice, then that also feeds back into their own beliefs around money and how entitled or not entitled they are to money. And that gets passed on from generation to generation to generation. Right. And so in a way, I would really say if we want to stop these unhealthy intergenerational patterns, the buck stops with us. Like, we are now the generation that needs to be conscious about the things that we personally and our family has been projecting onto money, and reclaim that back into our identity so that we are free to deal with and also without money in our life.
Yeah, that's thanks for that. That's really so I was just thinking back. So if you look at the first aspect that you mentioned, and then the first one is the conscious, the second is the unconscious, and the third is more of the neutral. The three of them all seem kind of, oh my God. And you did mention that, okay, in order to know which type an individual is, they have to look at their money story, right? So is there a midway whereby someone doesn't feel like they're either the first, the second, the third? Or are we always going to be placed into either the first one, the conscious, the unconscious, or the washing machine aspect, like you mentioned?
Well, firstly, let me make one small correction. They're all three of them are unconscious, because that's the key word here. Mm-hmm. What we know from brain psychology today, from neuropsychology, is that our world is created through projection. So in a way, you could say everything that I perceive is a projection. So I cannot not project. However, the question is, am I conscious of the process of projection? Because I create very different results in my life, whether I do it unconsciously or consciously. So now the trick is to get it from the unconscious to a more conscious place, because you could say if it's unconscious, it's like a dark shadow running my life. And if it becomes conscious, it becomes the power of visualization, right? It becomes the power of manifesting something in your life that you also now project into the future. Because you could, for example, argue, I work with a lot of founders and within startups, but also in family-run businesses. So people who have basically projected a vision into the future and then manifested that vision. So that's also a process of projection, but it's a conscious process of projection, right? Mm-hmm. So the work we have to do, from my perspective, is to dig around in the dirt, if you want, and get our hands really dirty to find the projections that we have. And to your question, is there a middle way? And are some people none of the above? There are probably some, but honestly, I have rarely met such a person. I think in my entire dealings with clients, hundreds of clients over the last 20 years as a coach, I've probably met 2 people that I think are really, truly free of projections, unconscious projections on money. And the way you can tell is they don't get triggered by money. So money neither serves as a huge incentive for them. You can't punish them with money. They don't have fights about money. They're not afraid of losing money. They're also not afraid of getting money. Yeah, so they're basically neutral around money and see it truly simply as a tool to realize a vision or a wish that they have in the world. But from my experience, that is very rare. And, and okay, maybe one more thing about the, how is the distribution, one should say, of the different projection types. It's quite interesting because when people, for example, start in CU Money, most of them think, well, either I don't have any unconscious projections, to your question, or they think, I think I have positive projections on money, right? So the first thing that comes out of their mouth is something like money is just a tool and money is, creating a bit more security and safety for me. And then once we start digging deeper, they start to unearth all the dead bodies in their family closet, and suddenly they go, oh my God, I had no idea, right? How much negative stuff is connected to money and how much money has been a source of recurring conflict in our family. So many people have unconscious negative projections on money, also in their family history. And proof of that is actually the way the world is run right now. If we look at the distribution of wealth, you can see that only a very small percentage of people in the world, the 1%, have intensely, or maybe it's the top 4%, have intensely unconscious positive projections on money, and they've become very, very good at hoarding money. Yeah. And the rest of us, I'm probably in the top 4%, but definitely not in the top 1%. They push money away. So we have this cycle of unconscious negative projections pushing money into the hands of those with unconscious positive projections. And thus you create this imbalance of wealth in the world.
Okay. That is quite interesting that they're pushing money to the top 4%. How was there a study done around that, or how would you describe the effects of the projection in the real world, basically? How does it happen? Because that kind of piqued my interest in those that are not in the top 4%, they push it towards those in the top 4%. How does that work, and how does that happen in the real world?
So, what I notice, for example, some of my individual clients are amongst the top 1%, right? So from my perspective, they have more money than God. However, does that make them feel like they're secure? Does that give them sort of this deep sense of relaxation and being taken care of in the world? It doesn't, and that has always been baffling to me, because I have all of these people who have all the money and therefore I thought all the freedom in the world to do what they want, but they don't do what they want because suddenly they are busy with managing their assets. Yeah, so securing and growing their assets becomes their main point of interest, but it's not necessarily the thing that they're passionate about in the world. So they are caught in a, one could say in a golden hamster wheel. I mean, it's a very comfortable hamster wheel. Yeah, very plush, and every appliance is gold, but they're still running like a crazy hamster in this wheel because they have to keep the wheel turning, because they panic when their assets shrink. They panic when stock loses value. They, even if they have so much money that you honestly think, well, why do you care? It's not going to affect your life in any noticeable way, and it will not affect your children's life in any noticeable way, and it probably won't even affect your grandchildren's life in any noticeable way. So why are you afraid? Why does that put you in a panic? So for me, with those clients, it's then always interesting to unpick why do they not feel secure in themselves, and why do they feel they need to have all of this money to somehow fill this gap in their soul that I perceive quite clearly, right? And then I have other clients that often come to, sort of the open programs that we run that are basically on a sliding scale. We try to make them accessible for anybody who is truly motivated. So I often have clients in those programs who are in quite dire straits when it comes to money. And the experience that I see there over and over is that somehow they reproduce the dynamic of not getting any money. Like they can't figure out. It's like this conundrum that they can't solve. They don't know how to be effectful in the world and be paid for it, right? And everything they do is nearly an act of self-sabotage. So in those life stories, we then have to look at, what is it that you're trying to push away? For example, quite often, especially with people who have the intention to be a good person, right? Who have the intention to, to save the planet, to be helpful to other people, who are sort of, the liberal helper type. Let's call them that. Yeah. What they have to integrate is a shadow that they have projected onto money. So they have to look at their own greed. They have to look at their own ability to manipulate. They have to look at their own violence. They have to look at their own nature as an oppressor in the world. And instead of projecting that away from themselves, they have to what we call is a process of reclamation. They have to reclaim it and re-identify with those human aspects. Because if they don't integrate the shadow, they will always be disempowered. And the experience around money will always be one of constant loss and struggling for it, of this constant feeling that I have to earn my living. And it's so hard. Yeah. At the moment they begin to reintegrate these darker aspects of the human condition, I should say, they begin to have power, and they begin to be able to say no, to be more clear in the offers they make, to raise their prices when they're independent, to ask for raises when they're employed. Yeah, so all of these things suddenly come naturally, and they have everything to do with integrating the shadow.